Hello YouTubers, this is Atilla Yeşilada and you're at the Real Turkey channel, the only real Turkey channel that's really from Turkey and that's somewhat in English. Spanglish, comprehensible, I suppose, I hope. And greetings to Sheboygan, Wisconsin, where I spent a lovely year. Beautiful city, you should all visit it. Today, we're going to talk about two disasters in the making. One of them is Turkey's budget deficits. The other one is Turkey's unemployment rate. Mr. Berat Albayrak, our economist, claims Turkish economy has defended attacks by foreigners like you miserable foreign devils, you Christians, you are killing the Turkish economy. We all know you hate us. And he says the Turkish economy has now recovered from these attacks and we're going to grow 5%. He adds that there are some co-conspirators in Turkey who parade as economists and spread malicious news because they're getting paid by the foreigners and they should be punished by prison if possible. I happen to be one of them. Even though I haven't been paid by any of you so far, YouTube hopefully will pay me. But anyhow, unfortunately, this bright picture of the Turkish economy he paints is complete bullshit. Excuse my French. The Turkish economy is going to hell in a handbasket, as they say. And let me prove it to you. Start with budget deficits. There is some recovery in the economy. I suppose Turkish economy won't shrink this year. It might grow by 0.3% or 0.5%, which Berat Albayrak presents as a victory. But this happens because by October, budget deficits reached 100 billion liras. That's roughly $18 billion. Or roughly 3% of our GDP. So the budget has a 3% deficit, but the economy grows only by 0.3%. The math doesn't add up, but Berat Albayrak, doesn't seem to understand that. The non-interest deficit is 12 billion liras or roughly $2.5 billion. And that's supposed to grow to $4 billion by year end. Next year, we think the budget deficits are going to be completely out of control and could reach 5% of GDP. Now, if you live in the United States or any other advanced country, except in Germany, where budget deficits are extremely important, Germans are very anal retentive about budget deficits and inflation. But in any other modern country, budget deficits 4%, 5%, if they're temporary, no big problem. Simply because the Treasury has excellent credit rating and it can borrow at very cheap interest rates. In fact, in most countries where you watch this video, unless you're in Bangladesh or Myanmar, the Treasury can borrow at negative interest rates. Well, that's not the case in Turkey. We have borrowing restrictions. The last time we borrowed abroad, we paid 5.5% for 5 years. But more importantly, the Treasury's main customer are Turkish commercial banks, and they can't lend more to the Treasury simply because they have a very limited deposit base. If they lend more to the Treasury, they will have to lend less to consumers and corporates. That's called the crowding out effect. It is the government or the state sector crowding out the private sector. And that's what's going to happen next year. So since the Treasury has a better credit rating than Atilla Yeşilada, who is a consumer, or Atilla Yeşilada Fly-By-Night Corporation, which is a corporate, of course, I'll have to pay higher interest rates. That means I will invest less and spend less. So, Turkish economy will not grow. If the Turkish Treasury wants to borrow more abroad, it will have to pay higher interest rates too. And this time it will crowd out Turkish banks and corporates, which have to roll over $170 billion of foreign debt. So this is clearly unsustainable. But of course, if you want to cut budget deficits, you need to either increase taxes, which kills the population, which can't spend at this point, or you have to come up with savings, which reduces the economic growth rate. This is the nightmare we find ourselves in. It's a disaster in the making, and it completely belies the bright economic scenario Mr. Berat Albayrak is portraying. But a bigger problem, which is turning into a humanitarian disaster, is the unemployment. The Turkish Statistics Agency takes monthly unemployment surveys as it happens in Europe and the United States, but the way it reports is sort of like a monthly moving average of quarterly rates. So to make things simple, we received August data, but it's actually an average of July, August, and September. Non-farm unemployment was 16.5%. Youth unemployment was 27.5%. Over the last year, Turkey lost roughly 800,000 jobs. Well, we lost about 1 million, but some of them came from the agriculture, where I don't know how they calculate things. We lost 500,000 jobs in construction. The rest came from industry and services. In the last data, there was some improvement in services because of tourism, etc. But overall, the job figures are awful. I have consulted private think tanks as well as professors who wrote on the issue. We could expect another percentage increase until the end of the year. Now that's a serious problem because also wages are stagnant. Real wages have not increased for over a year. This means that Turks' ability to consume would go down sharply. There's another problem here. Anatolia is going through one of its frequent hot and dry spells. Right now, the temperatures here are like in September. You see in this particular location, which is actually a home, parading as a church, so I don't have to pay taxes. The Church of Odin, by the way. I haven't turned on the heater. When I turn on the heater, I will realize that electricity and natural gas prices have gone up by 60%, and I'm screwed. So I will have less money to spend. And then the fact that real wages have not increased is going to hurt me quite a bit. What I'm trying to say is an economy's total private consumption is equal to wages times the number of people employed. And when you lost 1 million jobs, plus your wages are not increasing, plus a lot of it, the disposable income is going to the heating, then you really have no room, no budget left for discretionaries, like for refrigerators, going to the movies, or going to McDonald's, whatever they're called. And this is the problem we find ourselves in. Poverty is becoming a serious problem. Over the last 10 days, you may have read it in the news, 3 families had committed collective suicide with cyanide. Now, suicides happen, suicide pacts happen quite a bit in Western countries. And our vice president said, well, it's not right to link this to economic misery. Except all of these 3 families left notes explicitly blaming their suicides on their debts and on their economic distress. They said, we are killing ourselves because we don't have any money. We're being expelled from our houses and we can't pay our debts. So, there. Before that, there were 3 cases of self-immolation, people burning themselves because they couldn't pay their debts. This is a nightmare. I am seriously becoming afraid of social unrest because we're right next door to Iraq and Iran. Look it up in the map. I'm not making this up. As you might have seen on the news, Iran has turned into a cauldron of unrest. We don't know how many people died because there's an internet blackout. Iraq, I think over 200 people died as of now, and 15 people have been injured. There are political reasons for the unrest as well. I'm not denying it, but mostly it is because people are in poverty and sick of living like this. I hope Turkey doesn't see those days, but I see a government which cannot inject income into the economy through fiscal deficits. I see unemployment getting worse and simply private sector having lost its dynamism. And I'm sorry, I have to call this a disaster. This is the Real Turkey channel. We have no good news. This is Turkey. Bye-bye.